place done on Wednesday. So we'll see how things go next. Nothing will probably work next Sunday with everything's new, but we're excited about that. Welcome. Great to see everyone here. Those of you joining online, good morning. It's good to have you with us as well. We've been doing a series called Escape Room and looking at different areas and things in life that we find ourselves involved in that we need to escape from guilt, from fear, anxiety, escape from anger. And today is another one as we think about escaping from the pain of the past and that pain that lingers around and that pain that is there. And this series actually has been easier to preach than I thought. And the reason being is this: one, I can relate to all of them, and I'm preaching to myself. But two, we have a Bible full of people whose lives were a mess, right? And you can go and you can look at these different characters in the Bible and just see how they had to deal with anxiety. These characters and how they had to deal with guilt and how they had to deal with anger and deal with those things in which they faced. And so we have these illustrations, we have these examples in the Bible, and one we've talked about a couple times that we're going to go back to this morning. So I want you to take your Bibles, if you will, and I want you to go to the book of Genesis, chapter 32, as we look at a man by the name of Jacob again. You know, Jacob, this guy had problems. And if you want to read a crazy biography, read the biography of Jacob. And his name meaning supplanter, and seeing from the time of his birthright to the time of his marriage, to the time of his family, to this time with Esau, to the time after Esau. I mean, everything just continues to go downhill for this man. But yet Jacob's name eventually is going to be changed to what? Israel. And we hear a lot about Israel today. He's the father of the 12 tribes. I mean, it's amazing to see what God did with this man, but man, did he have to go through a lot. And you remember in 32, we see him here, and we talked about it a few weeks ago in the middle of a panic attack. And then from there, he wrestles with God. He meets Esau in chapter 33. And then in chapter 34, we won't dive into it directly, but we're going to talk about it a little bit this morning. We just see things going from bad to worse. It seems like he's got things going for him. We have here in chapter 32 the panic attack, but then you look at 33 and it all comes together in verse 4. He and Esau got together, they embraced, they fell on each other, they kissed his brothers, they made up, they wept, they caught up on old times. They had this great reunion together. It was wonderful. It couldn't be better. And then he goes from there to a place called Shechem. And somehow when Jacob gets to Shechem, things just go off. What happens is when Jacob gets to Shechem, Jacob forgets who he is, what he is, and why he's here. And as he begins his life, and as the children begin to get older, and as he begins to set the vision and set the direction and pave the way for his family, he begins to go off course. The year was 1979. A passenger plane, a passenger jet carrying 257 people left New Zealand for a sightseeing flight to see Antarctica and then fly back. Unknown to the pilots, however, there was a minor 2-degree error in their flight coordinates. This placed the aircraft 28 miles to the east of where the pilots thought they were. As they approached Antarctica, the pilots descended to a lower altitude to give the passengers a better look at the landscape of Antarctica. Although both were experienced pilots, neither one had made this particular flight before. They had no way of knowing that the incorrect coordinates had placed them directly in the path of an active volcano that rises from the frozen landscape to a height of more than 12,000 feet. Sadly, the plane crashed into the side of the volcano, killing everyone on board. It was a tragedy brought only by a minor error, a matter of a few degrees. And in the flight world, in the navigation world, this is called 1 in 60, the 1 in 60 rule. What's the 1 in 60 rule? The 1 in 60 rule is this. It states that for every 1 degree a plane veers off its course, it misses its target destination by 1 mile for every 60 miles you fly. What's that mean? That means after 100 yards, you'll be off 5.2 feet. No big deal. After a mile, you'll be off 92.2 feet. 1 degree begins to make a difference. If you veer off course by 1 degree flying around the equator, you'll almost land 500 miles off target. The point is this: small actions accumulated over a very long period of time make a huge difference. So in your mind right now, you're thinking, what's a degree? Let me show you. You can barely see it. Here's a 90-degree angle and a 1-degree angle coming off of it. That little degree killed hundreds. That little degree can make a huge difference. Here in Genesis, we find Jacob just getting off course. Just veering off course, just slightly off where God wanted him, and it totally throws him off. You see, here's the point. Satan doesn't work in 10 degrees or 20 degrees or in 60 degrees. Satan works with 1 degree. And what the devil wants to do is he just wants to come alongside of you and just nudge. Okay, that's all. He's in no hurry. He doesn't care if it's tomorrow or 20 years from now. But Satan knows if he can come in and he can just slightly veer you off course. I mean, just an nth of a degree of a 90 degree, that looks like nothing. But over a period of time, it can make a major impact. Listen to me. In 20 plus years of ministry, I have received countless phone calls, text messages, emails, and people coming in and sitting down in my office saying, Trey, I don't know how we ended up here. I have no idea how my life has become such a mess. Why can't they understand how they've ended up where they are? Because there isn't something that just majorly happened. It was just Satan going, just a little. Just a little nudge. Just a little push. Just a little here, right? And then the next thing we know, we're totally out of our walk with God. We're hardly even acting like Christians in our daily lives anymore. We're completely thrown off from where we need to be. In this story, this is Jacob 15 years down the road, maybe 20. He's nowhere close to where he thought he was going to be. Setbacks, sins, stuff, right? Things we go through in life can get us off course. COVID, man, it could have just totally thrown our lives and did throw our lives totally off course. But it just doesn't happen to individuals, churches as well. We could raise hands, and probably all raise hands of churches that we've known over the years that we would say were good churches and churches that we enjoyed and churches that we like to be in. And now we're like, man, where has that church gone? Some of you this morning are sitting here because you would say, man, the church I grew up in is nothing like it was when I was growing up there. Okay, what happened? Was it the one moment, right? Was it the one issue? Was it that thing? No. Just ever so slightly, the church started to lose focus. It started to go off course. It started to go a direction that man, you know, can't really pinpoint it, but just something doesn't feel right. And the next thing you know, 10 years later, it's gone. Revelation chapter 2, the church at Ephesus, right? Man, if it wasn't for that church, we wouldn't have one of the greatest books in the New Testament, the book of Ephesians. And yet, the Lord sends a letter to the church and says, hey, church, you're doing great. I know your works and your labor of love and how you kick out the bad guys and build up the good guys and all of that. But I have something against you because you've gone off a degree. You've left your first love. And if you don't get back on track, you're going to be out of the picture. He gave them the warning of the direction they were going. So what do? You know, how do we fix our course if we've gone off course? How do we make things right before we hit that volcano, before you end up in my office, before we look up and say, God, how did we get here? I'll never get my family back. Nothing will ever be the same again. There's only one way to do it, and that's a restart. I've got to go back and I've got to start this trajectory all over again. I've got to go back and recalibrate my instruments, right? and get going the right way. But let me tell you this morning, that is much easier said than done. Because we don't want to go back. We don't want to step back. And I don't think it would be right this morning without acknowledging at least our troops who have been in battle, and many of those who have given their lives for us. As we think about our soldiers, a study was done in 2017 with over 5,000 veterans. And of those 5,000 veterans that were interviewed in 2017, almost 13% of them were diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. You say, well, that doesn't seem like a strikingly high number considering what they have gone through and being there in the military. It is when you consider the average American, the non-soldier, only 6% of them suffer some type of PTSD. So over, then, 50%, doubled what the normal population is, suffers with PTSD in our military. 87% reported exposure to at least one potentially traumatic event. Of those 87% that did that, on average, they experienced 3.4 potentially traumatic, life-changing events in their time in the military. Okay, this PTSD is also sometimes called re-experiencing symptoms that they experienced while they were in battle. These intrusive forms of thinking include memories and dreams, and they are quite vivid. In some cases, individuals with a diagnosis of PTSD will have what we know as flashbacks. For veterans, these intrusive thoughts might include memories, dreams, or flashbacks of distressing combat experiences. Okay, their minds go back to injuries or fatalities that they saw or experienced, and it just intrudes their thoughts. Okay, and they want to get rid of that. They don't want to see that. They want that gone. And even though many of us here this morning might not have served in military, and we might not be struggling with PTSD, and we might not have the vivid images that some of these soldiers have in their minds, it doesn't change the fact that we have a past that brings back pain. That somewhere along our lives and in our lives, we have faced hurt, and we're being trapped by that past. Hurt, abandonment, abuse, sickness, pressures, addictions, divorce, drugs, immorality, etc. And sometimes the past can be a very painful place to be, with our failures, our hurts, death, the valleys of darkness where there seems there's no hope. So the question is this: how do we process the past? How do we take these things that we've gone through and deal with them? You know, our tendency, again, is not to go back. Our tendency is to run. Our tendency is to take Philippians chapter 3 and forget those things which are behind and press toward to those things which are before. It's the past. That's why we call it the past. Let's leave it in the past and let's go forward and let's move on. The problem is that's not reality, because you know as well as I do, it keeps coming back. And the past keeps showing up. And the hurt and the pain keeps resurfacing somehow, some way. Because running from it isn't healthy. It's not helping. It's not healing. I'm not even sure it's God's plan. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to dive back into the life of Jacob. Look what he went through. And see how God helps him overcome. Okay, finding himself off course and getting him back on track. So as we think about that this morning, the first thing I want to just discuss and throw out there, okay, is this: messes are mandatory. All right? Messes are mandatory. Say, what do you mean by that, Trey? Here's what I mean. There we go. Okay, here's what I mean. Romans 8:28. We love it, right? You can say it with me. Let's say it together. All things work together for, say it again. All things work together for good. When do we say that verse? When everything's good? No. See, this verse does me no good if everything's good. We use this verse when it's all bad. I mean, I don't know what's going on, but all I know is all things work together for good. I don't know why this has happened, but I know is all things work together for good. Life is messy. Okay, life is hard. And as we peel back who we are and we take the masquerade off, we take the mask off and we peel these layers back like peeling in an onion, we just get deeper and we get deeper. And like an onion, we just cry more and we cry more as we look at what's on the inside. And the deeper we go, the crazier it gets. But here's the deal. It's like a cross-stitch puzzle or cross-stitch picture, right? And you know what that is when somebody cross-stitches and you look on the back side of that pattern, it's a mess. I mean, what is that? And then you flip it, right? You've seen the illustration. Here's this beautiful picture. And when we look on the inside, it's like looking on the back of that cross stitch. It's a mess. But God specializes in making masterpieces out of messes. And God specializes in taking that mess and making it work. Again, just read your Old Testament and New Testament and see how God does that. Even our Apostle Paul, you talk about a life that was a mess. He was a mess. But look how God used him. So this morning, let me ask you to jump into the past. Take a chapter out of the book that you want to go away. That chapter of the book of your life that you've put a padlock on, you've locked it, and you've thrown the key away. One that you just wanted to make disappear that shouldn't be there. I don't want it there. I hate it. But listen to me. God never took his hand off of the pen writing the script of your life, even in that chapter. He was there. God had never left you. God was using these things in your life and orchestrating these things to bring together for good. Sure, there might be a word or two that you've added yourself that God wouldn't have. But it was still his story. It's still God's script. And that chapter that you want to get rid of is a chapter that God uses to make it all come together for his glory. David had no idea that his life that was such a mess was going to accomplish so much. Say, Trey, what do you mean? Well, one of the worst chapters, as I'm concerned, in all the Bible is 2 Samuel 11, when David falls with Bathsheba. I have been known in my yearly Bible reading not to read that chapter, and that's a true story. I hate it. That's my man. And watching him fall into that sin, it just kills me. But yet this past week, I received a phone call on Wednesday asking me to do a funeral for a 3-year-old on Friday. The family had no pastor. The funeral director said, "You're the first person that the Lord put on my mind to call to do this funeral. Would you come and do it?" And so Friday morning, I had to stand before this family who had lost their 3-year-old who drowned in a septic tank. What do I tell them? What do I tell them? There's one passage that every pastor for hundreds of years has gone to in a situation like this. Bathsheba has a son, and David will not eat, David will not drink. David is pouring his heart out to God, asking God to save the son. The son is born, the son gets sick, the son dies. The servants come to David and say, "David, your son is dead," and they're bracing for what's going to happen. David gets up, gets cleaned up, takes a shower, and has dinner. And they're like, "What's going on?" This is when David should be going crazy, not be okay. They say, "David, we don't understand." And David makes this statement. He says, "My son will never come back to me, but I will what? I will go to him." You see, without the mess, we wouldn't have that verse. Without the mess, I wouldn't have that to go to in those funerals, and we wouldn't have the hope that those of us who have lost children here would be able to see their child again one day. If it wasn't for the mess, we wouldn't have Psalm 53, one of the greatest 50, that we have in our Bibles, right? Psalm 51, I'm sorry. If it wasn't for the mess, we wouldn't have Jesus Christ, because he was the lineage of who? Bathsheba. We have messy chapters. We have messy lives. True statement, I'm a mess. And I admit it. But you know what? God specializes in working with messes. So what do we do? How do we go about getting ourselves back on course? Okay, so yeah, Drake, my life's a mess. Okay, we get it. But how do I get back on course? How do I start over again? Okay, well, let's go back and see what God tells Jacob here and what Jacob needs to do. Number one, God tells Jacob this: Jacob, you've got to take personal responsibility. Personal responsibility. What? I mean, was it his fault in chapter 34 that we see his daughter sexually abused and raped? That we see his kids commit murder? I mean, look what he says at the end of chapter 34. If this doesn't depict where he is, I don't know what would. 34 and verse 30. And Jacob said to Simeon and to Levi, his sons, you have troubled me to make me stink among the inhabitants of the land. 20 years we've lived here. 20 years we've built this reputation. For 20 years we've tried to make something happen, and you've ruined it. And we're few in number, and they're going to gather themselves against me and slay me, and I will be destroyed, and all of my house. Chapter 35 and verse 1, God said to Jacob, get up, go back to Bethel, dwell there. I want you to make an altar unto God, the God that showed up in Bethel and appeared to thee when you fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. There's a lot of things that happen in Bethel. And man, that chapter, as we looked, is just an awesome chapter. But God doesn't say, Jacob, I want you to go back to the place where we wrestled and you won, man. Congratulations. The place where we wrestled and you made it all night without a drink and a timeout. That's pretty good. Go back where I changed your name. No. I want you to go back where you were scared to death. Jacob, I want you to step back in that place where you were having a major panic attack. Jacob, I want you to go back to Bethel, okay, where you lost all faith in me. That's what God brings up. That's what God reminds him in. 15 years ago, when your faith failed, he says, I'll meet you there. He says, you got to take personal responsibility for what's happened, Jacob. That's what took place. That's what's going on. That's where you were. You know, as I look back on the past, as you look back on the past, it's not all our fault. We know that. A lot of things that happened might not have had anything to do with us. We might have just been totally taken advantage of. We were a victim. But in a lot of cases, I've got to be willing to face that maybe part of the problem was me. Maybe I need to take ownership of the mess that my family is in right now. I must be willing to look and see how maybe I did some things wrong, how I didn't handle the situation in the right way. You know, we don't like it. We don't want to talk about it. We want to play the blame game. We want to come out clean. It wasn't me. It was them. It's their fault. Okay, but God doesn't work that way. You know, I love the story with the prophet Elisha. When, you know, he's got a heart for men, they're training for ministry, they've outgrown their Bible school, now they're making a bigger school of the prophets, you know the story. And one of the young men borrowed an axe because he didn't have 2 pennies to rub together as a college kid, and he's using this borrowed axe and he's cutting down this tree, and then all of a sudden the head of the axe goes flying into the Jordan. Alas, master, it was borrowed, I don't have any money to replace it. And Elisha says this, and I love this phrase, where did it go down? Okay, where did you lose it? Where did it sink? The church at Ephesus has gone awry. It's going its own direction, and God says, I have someone against you because you've left your first love. Return. Where did you lose it? Where did you lose your love? We talked about Moses and his anger and how Moses struck the rock twice. He didn't speak to the rock. God doesn't come to Moses and say, Moses, because the children of Israel were so impatient, because they were so stubborn, because they were such complainers, they caused you to strike the rock. No. God says, because you struck the rock. We got to take ownership. We've got to look and say, okay, where did I go wrong? Why am I here? Why am I so far away from God? Why am I not where I used to be? Why am I not enjoying the things that I used to enjoy? Why am I not the Christian that I used to be? Okay, I've got to take personal responsibility, and I've got to see what is going on, and I've got to see where I've lost it. Jacob, when you left Bethel, brother, you started to veer off course. So there's a responsibility, but there's also, number two, a remembrance. A remembrance. Again, we want to delete our memories. We don't want to bring up the past, but so much of who we are today is based on what we were. Even the word male, God created the male and female in the Hebrew. The root word means to remember. God wants us to remember what He's taken us through. God wants us to remember who we are. God wants us to remember the past to help us. Remember, therefore, from whence you are fallen. Remember what happened in Bethel. Jacob, remember how you got there. Remember the anxiety that you felt there. Remember how God met you there. Remember how God changed you there. Remember what you experienced there. You see, by remembering, I'm processing the past. I'm not pushing it away. By remembering, I'm confessing the hurt. I'm not trying to use coping mechanisms. And there's times in life where I've just got to open my heart and look back to remember. Jacob, do you remember 15 years ago when we met? Jacob, do you remember what was going on? Do you remember the anxiety? Do you remember the lapse of faith? Do you remember what you were going through? Do you remember? And then number three, after I take responsibility and I remember, there's a call to action. There's a repentance or there's a reflection. Okay, what's going on here? What's happened? Look what Jacob remembers. Look what he reflects upon. He comes to the family and he tells them in verse 3, come on guys, get up, we're going to Bethel. I'm going to make there an altar to God. Why? Because it was there when God answered me in the day of my distress, and it was there that God was with me everywhere I went. You see, I'm going to go back because even in the midst of the turmoil, God was there. Even in the midst of the hardship, God was there. David said in Psalm 27, had I failed to see, I'd have thrown in the towel, I'd have quit, had I failed to see the goodness of God. So even in the devastating circumstances, we can see God. In the midst of the cancer, we saw that God was there. In the midst of the disease, we saw God was there. In the midst of the loss of a family member, God was there. In the midst of the hurt, I can look back, and as I reflect on all the anxiety, God was there. Matter of fact, God was more real then than I think He's ever been. So why am I trying to push that out? And Jacob says, I've got to go back, and as I reflect, I remember God was there. So if God was there and I'm going to go back and I'm going to meet with God, okay, I've got to get real with some things. Okay, and I've got to deal with some things. And I've got to take care of some things. Because for the past 20 years, Jacob has been covering it up. For the past 20 years, Jacob's kind of been running from his calling. For the past 20 years, Jacob has just been doing his thing, and now God stirred up that memory, and now it's time to deal. Now it's time to go deep. Now it's time to stop hiding, stop covering it up. Okay, personally, this is where it's time for me to stop saying it's all good, I got it under control, right? Two of my favorite phrases of all time. I remember as a senior in college, I was president of my senior class. I was president of all the fraternities, collegians, societies, whatever you call them. I was over all of those. Okay, not to mention being transferred in, I was behind, so I was taking 21 credit hours so I could graduate on time. And man, my life was crazy my senior year. And I remember being called into the student life's office and called into the dean's office and saying, Treg, this has got to happen, and this has got to happen, and this has got to happen. Do you have it all taken care of? And my favorite statement was this: it's all under control. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh man, I haven't done anything. Right? It's all good. It's all under control. It wasn't all good, and it wasn't all under control. And if I'd have just said, you know what, Doc, I'm way behind, man. I need some help. But I couldn't do that. Why? Because I'm Trey. I got it all under control. Did I get it all done? Yes. Did I pull it all off? Yes. Okay? But I shouldn't have. Okay? I trying to throw things away, trying to make things okay when they're not okay. We got to go deep. Why? Why am I the way that I am? Let me tell two stories here. One is a pastor. His first name is Andy. Andy tells a story when he was in 8th grade. He was trying out for the basketball team, high school basketball team. 100 kids trying out for the 8th grade basketball team. Andy makes it to the final cut. Okay, they're doing a scrimmage. After this scrimmage, the coach is going to list off the 10 players who's going to make it on the 8th grade basketball team. And so Andy makes it to that cut. He's in this scrimmage. It's coming down to the last few seconds left. Okay, Andy takes a screen. He runs to the corner of the floor. He grabs the ball right on the corner and he pulls up and he shoots with hardly any time left on the clock. And Andy says, I missed the rim. I missed the backboard. I missed the net. I hit nothing. Total air ball. Right across the floor on the sidelines was the coach who yells, Andy, you're a choke. You're a loser. You're never going to make it. And he was cut from the team. From that time forward, Andy never played a competitive sport again. It wasn't until he was well into his adult life that he realized that he wasn't a choke, that he wasn't a loser, and maybe he would be okay preaching in front of public. Andy's last name is Stanley. You might have heard of him. I was born in No Man's Land, Ohio. I had one cousin on my mom's side a year older than me, and a cousin on my dad's side a year older than me, and a cousin on my mom's side 2 years older than me. Both of them were girls. I was the first grandson, okay? And being the first grandson born into that family had great advantages. We were spoiled to death. I was spoiled. My grandparents spoiled me. I think I started talking when I was 6 months old. I loved going to my grandparents' house. I started drinking coffee when I was 3. And I sat at my grandparents' home drinking sugar and cream with some coffee in it with my grandparents, having that time together. That's just growing up. At 4 years old, my grandpa would have me come to work with my dad, and I would go and I would sit on the back of a backhoe and I would dig basements, okay, with my grandpa on the back of the backhoe, because I'm the first grandson. I'm going to take over the excavating business. This is who we are. This is what we are. This is Spicers Excavating, and I'm a Spicer, the oldest one. This is me. This is what I'm going to do. And growing up in that environment and growing up with my personality, okay, the whole world revolved around one person. Okay, that was me. And I enjoyed it. And I was spoiled. Okay, and I still am, I guess, in some ways. And I still have my grandparents here. At least the Spicers, Grandma and Grandpa Spicer, I love dearly. Now, here's what happens though. Okay, after a process of time, when you live in a world where the world revolves around you, okay, in the life of Treg, there was something that clicked, and what happens is the world starts revolving around you, and you feel like in life that the world can't function what? Without you. And you've got to hold the world together. Because these people have put their whole life into you and around you, and now you've got to make sure that you take care of them because you are the world. And in life, the reason why with me it was always all good, and the reason why with me it was always all under control, is because I felt like I had to hold the world together. Okay, and this is something that in my own life I've had to deal with for years and years and years. Because if I get a call from India saying, Pastor Spicer, we need someone to come and preach our graduation for our college students and preach a revival in the villages, my first reaction is what? I'm coming. And Pastor Spicer, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, but we need counseling right now. My first reaction is, it doesn't matter what else is going on, I'm going to do it right now, even if I don't know you. Because I can't say no, because Treg's got to hold the world together. Okay, that becomes a very stressful, painful, burdensome life. especially when something falls out and you realize that you messed it up or you weren't the one that did it and it didn't come together. How do we deal with that? Okay, how do we deal with this idol that's in my life? How do I deal with this thing that I'm going through right now? Let's go back to our text and notice what happens. Jacob says, this is what we are doing. And look at verse 4. Jacob took all the strange gods that were in their hands, and their earrings which were in their ears, and he buried them. He buried them under the oak tree. You know what we've got to do with the idols right now that we've inherited because we've gone off course and we found ourselves off course and this is where we are? We've got to bury them. We've got to bury them. They can't go with us. It was December 6, 2010. It was a Monday that everybody in the football world was talking about. The New England Patriots and the New York Jets were going to meet at Gillette Stadium on that Monday night for a battle for first place in the AFC East. Both teams were 9-2 coming out of Thanksgiving Day, and the football world could not wait to see who was going to come out number one. It was going to be a Monday night memory, but instead of a Monday night memory, that night went down as what they now called the Monday Night Massacre. The Patriots defeated the New York Jets 45-3. Coach Rex Ryan, the coach of the Jets at that time, had everybody come to practice on Wednesday after taking Tuesday off. When they got to the practice field, they noticed this huge hole that was dug beside the field and shovels beside it. Ryan was dressed up in black. Coaching staff was in black. And as the players came out to the field, they were taken through a mock funeral. Ryan took a football with the score of the game on it. He threw it in the grave and he buried it. And he said, guys, we've buried the past. This game is done. It's time to move forward for the future. They came back in the playoffs and they beat the Patriots to go on into the season. You know what I got to do with this? I've got to bury it. I've got to be done with the world. Church at Ephesus, man, they were serving. They were doing. And you know what God told them they had to do? Bury their doing and go back. Maybe it's time for you to bury the cape, superhero. Bury the cowboy hat, cowboy. Bury the supermom shirt, mom. Bury your idols. Bury your degrees. Bury your portfolio. Whatever it is that you have that's holding you back and keeping you from off course. Maybe it's burying the grief. Maybe it's burying the way that I was treated. Maybe it was burying the hurt. Whatever it is, you know what it is. But it doesn't stop there. After we bury, there's something exciting that gets to happen. We get a restart. We get a restart. Go back to your text. Look what takes place here. They journeyed. God blessed them in verse 5. They came back to the land. He built the altar that was there. In verse 9, God appeared to Jacob again. And look at verse 10. And God said unto him, your name is Jacob. Your name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name. And he called his name Israel. Wait a second, Jake. I thought that happened already. It did, but he veered off course. And God said, welcome back. We're going to do this again. Welcome back. We're going to start over again. Welcome back. You are Israel. You are the father of many nations. And I am God Almighty, and I want you to be fruitful and multiply, and a nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come from thee. You get a restart, Jacob. You get to start all over again. And God is telling us, church, we can restart. we can restart. God is going to give us that chance to move on, that chance to build the altar, that chance to do the first works, that chance to pull up that axe from the water again if we found where we put it. A chance to know that God was with us, a chance to reaffirm our position, to reaffirm our calling, to reaffirm our name. John talks about a little pool in Israel called the Pool of Bethesda. An angel would come and stir the water in the pools, and it says that the first person that gets into that water, they're healed. And there was a man laying beside that pool of water for 38 years who was unable to walk. His legs had no muscle. He had no one to help get him to the water once the water stirred. And he laid there for 38 years helpless. Jesus walks into that pool, and all the hundreds of people there that need help, he goes up to this man and he says this: do you want to get well? What? 38 years I couldn't walk. 38 years I've been trying to get into the water. 38 years I've been begging somebody to help me. What do you think? Many of you, it might have been 38 years ago. Might have been 3 years ago. It might have been 25 years ago. You know what you need to do to get back on course. You know the pain, though, that it's going to cause to dig that back up and to make those things right, to deal with it, to realize who I am and what I am and where I've come from. And Jesus is asking you this morning, church member, do you want to get well? Do you want to get back on track? Are you ready to come back with me and start this all over again? And no one can answer that question but you this morning. Let's stand together. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads and close your eyes as Carrie and Tim come. We're going to sing a hymn, Jesus, Thank You. But before we sing it, I'm going to have Carrie play it through one time, and then we're going to sing it with Tim. And as Carrie plays Jesus, Thank You, I just want you to go back in your mind, peel back some layers, and figure out where it is you've gone off course. And before you leave here this morning, I'm going to ask you to do business with God and be determined to go from here with a restart. Go from here back to the place where you met with God. Go from here back to the place where you were on the relationship with God you wanted to be. Go from here different than you came in. And if you need to perform a burial in your heart right now, do it. And if you need to go home and do it for real, dig a hole in the backyard and bury it. Do you want to get well?